The lesson.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk Unkut recordings. You are founder of Unkut Records.
Yes, Unkut Recordings. Myself and Robbie Edelson, who's gone on to greater things with his writing skills. I'm not sure if you check unkut.com itself, but yeah, he's got a book about to come out, and it's unbelievable. I mean, anyone that's familiar with the shit that he's writing and the interviews he's pulled off, it's some next level shit. And he really goes in on the people that you don't hear about or you don't know about, and definitely covers a lot of that late 80s into the early 90s guys that kind of either fell off the face of the earth or hard to track down, or put out one unbelievable release and that was it. And and then he's got some others that have carried on or whatever. But yeah, he's done his thing real well, man. But Robbie and I started the label in '97, and we kind of spoke about it probably for a year or so prior. He started off a little label, Unkut Productions, that he was kind of fucking around with. He did some course, I think, like a business course. I think it was it was like the NICE scheme or some fucking scamming scheme that the government did, where dudes that didn't want to work basically got funded to kick off a business. Yeah, and he put out a little record, and then that kind of he learned a bit from the industry. I mean, Robbie comes from a music industry background. His old man was heavily involved in Split Ends and what's his name? Vince. Oh, I can't remember, man. But he came up. So Robbie always grew up in the music industry to a degree with Australian rock dudes, or I don't know where you would put them on the genre scheme, but scale. But yeah, he kind of came up in that. So he kind of always wanted to get into that, and he kind of set it off first. So I was rapping, but he was doing the business side while he was rapping as well. And we just kind of, spoke about it to build on what he'd already learnt and where I wanted to go. I mean, I wanted to put out my album. He was working pretty hard with Bob Balance as the Formulators, which was their crew at the time. So they were working towards a release, and people now don't. It's such a different landscape now to what it was back then. I mean, the only people that put out records were labels. You didn't have a computer, you know what I mean? Like, there was no computer, there was no recording shit in your home, there was no Bandcamp, there was no fucking, I'm not even that familiar with all those SoundClouds and whatever, there was none of that. So to put your shit out, you had to really pay for it. So to pay for it and not lose money, or to make it worth paying for it, you had to have some level of skill, some real hungry passion to put it out. If you didn't have the skill and passion to make music to a quality that an established label wanted to put out, then you had to do it for yourself, which took some funding, some knowledge. Yeah, so Robbie and I kind of came together on that tip because we wanted to put music out. There was no labels in rap in this country at all at that stage. So Obese hadn't jumped off as a label, it was a store. And so, yeah, we kind of started building on the idea of putting a label together. At the same time, Obese kind of kicked off. And I think there was maybe a label in Sydney at the time, and Lazy Grey was doing his thing up north. I can't speak too much at Adelaide. I think, I don't know when the Hood's first release was, or Finger Licking Good had come out. I don't know what that label was, but everyone was kind of, the only acts rap-wise in this country then that were putting out product had to basically form their own label to put it out. You had to establish a business that could build a business relationship with the stores. And this is pre-online sales of any type as well. So you couldn't just fucking have a Bandcamp page or an online store and shit. It was non-existent. It's crazy to think that now, actually. So the only way to sell was at shows, in the street, on the corner, or in a shop. So you had to build a business. So we built Unkut Recordings to put out my album and the Formulators album, and yeah, that's kind of where it stemmed from there, man. And that was cool. That was a big step. It was a big deal back then to form a label, and we always said, you know, we didn't. You have to understand that as Obese grew more and more, you know, they became bigger and bigger and bigger, and they started to sort of sign on a lot more people. We always wanted to have a defining hand in the acts that came on, and then the music they put out. They had to fit the mold. They had to fit the mold of the raw uncut. They had to, you know, the term uncut was because what we did was raw dope. You know what I mean? Like that's what it was, and that's what was always going to come out on the label. You know, that was kind of the words that we said at the time. So yeah, having that extra hand in everything that came out on the label was something that we sort of set out to do. Now, obviously, Robbie kind of moved on a little bit, and I really engulfed myself into the studio shit. So we as I said before, we bought Prowler's studio. So he kind of upgraded. He learnt more. He was working with Platonic Lab at that stage. So he'd work with Jace, Beatheads, and then he kind of, yeah, Pluto taught him a whole heap of new shit, I think, and started to streamline his stuff to show him how easy it could be if you upgrade to computer, and twisted his arm to doing it. So he had the old equipment, which Robbie and I bought, and we used it. I used it. The first time I used it on my own to make a song was Demolition Derby on Strut's Authentic release, which was the first. Actually, that's a good question. I think we were talking before about what was the first LC track, and it was either the Crossbred Mongrels track. I still think that was the first one, or Demolition Derby was the other one that we did at the time on Strut's Authentic album. I don't know about the years. Someone here might be able to help us out. I don't know which came first, but the Mongrels track came first, and then Demo Derby must have came just after. Because I was still real green at that recording by myself shit. So I remember I learnt a lot from Debris, even being there. And then once I upgraded from Prowler's old studio to getting a computer myself, Platonic Lab helped me out, and so did Debris. I was having all sorts of troubles with that shit. And I remember Hoods were in Melbourne at some stage, and I just rang Debris and said, "Can you come over and have a look at this, man? I'm fucked." So he kind of, he had a little bearing in that infant stage as well for me getting my shit together. But ultimately I kind of took on that whole studio shit. And Robbie kind of, did his thing and moved it on. But so we kind of kicked that off, and as you know, we did Sheer Talent and Amateurs, and Rob did his 12. And then, we kind of shape-shifted into forming LC, and the Stages set was the first big one really to come out.
So who's the, I guess, what's the official roster of Unkut Recordings, and what releases have you guys put out?
Well, the roster's probably changed a little bit, and the roster itself is not always relative to the product that's come out as well. So the label itself is, apart from having that, that hand in everything, the other thing we always wanted to maintain was a quality over quantity, which has kind of been our byline for many years. Or from the start, really, and the thing is that what that brings is, particularly in this country, and especially as other labels started to come up that did have some quality acts, it left us our releases were pretty sparse, you know what I mean? And they still are, but that's okay, because we didn't form the label to make money. We formed the label to put our music out, ultimately, to get it to the masses. And it still operates in the same way, really, you know what I mean? So the roster itself has kind of changed a little bit over the years, which I must say we're actually 20 years in effect this year, in 2017. So it's our 20, we formed in 97 and it's 2017, which is pretty crazy. But obviously myself and the Formulators kicked it off. They kind of split Robbie did his solo stuff, so he did the Rob Natural stuff. Strut kind of had a foot in Obese and a foot in Uncut. So Obese really handled Authentic, but we did Demo Derby, and we were kind of in that infant stage of performing live together and starting to formulate LC. So as a token kind of gesture, I guess, we kind of coexisted with Obese on that one, really for the first and only time. And Uncut was on it. And then basically LC became the primary shit, and then us as solo acts, ultimately. Once Murderous came out, as we said, I sort of, we started to look to push it, bring in some new acts. As I went from working on my shit to the LC shit, I really started to build and engage in working with the guys more so than myself. And that's really started to evolve more and more and more as the years have gone on. And I love to work with other guys and bring a team into effect and get the best out of everyone, and put, that's probably something that I enjoy as much as any facet of the whole thing is doing that, hence why more what I'm doing now. So yeah, after that it was kind of a case of trying to bring in some other guys, hence the 360 thing, and we looked at some other acts. There was a lot of young kids coming through in the battle scenes that were happening then, and making demos and sending them out. And Left One was another young crew from Brisbane, who out of that rose L-Flows, one of their MCs, and he's actually on the label now. We're just finishing off his album. So yeah, we started to push it, but the 360 kind of thing didn't work, and to be honest, it left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth as far as, really not knowing what you're going to get when you get someone on a label, which I understand that's actually a byproduct of it, but you can't always kind of mold someone into what you want them to be or to suit the label. So that's cool. We have to go about it. It kind of just made me think, well, why would you bother trying again? And that kind of that ended a little bit, I wouldn't say nasty, but a bit fucked up, so. And I was full steam ahead then with Murderous and then the Strut shit anyway, so it was kind of a case of there's only so much I can spread myself around with work and everything else that's going on. So yeah, so the roster's kind of kept to that, and then we brought L-Flows on as a solo artist a couple of years ago. His album's just about finished. And of course Kings Connected, who have kind of, I guess, taken that mantle as the key group on the label, taking over from an LC or a Trem or a Strut as the key artist pushing the label, championing the label at the moment.
So you mentioned that the L-Flows album is coming out soon, so that'll be the next release on Unkut? That's
the next release on Unkut, yeah, yep. And just to touch on that, we have done other projects that weren't artists on the label. So we did the Turntable Jedis release, we did the wax only version of that, and we've done something else, but I'm actually working on a tape at the moment with Heater, which is like a cut and paste type thing. And that's really cool as well. So, there's a few more of those type of projects in the pipeline as well. Again, they're projects that I love the idea of, so I want to invest time and energy into it, you know what I mean? And that's what Unkut's always been about for me, is if I identify an artist or an act or a project that I feel like I want to be a part of, then we can build on it, speak about if it's going to work, and then hopefully bring it on board. So, and Kings Connected was definitely that as well, So, but yeah, L-Flows is coming. That'll be the next thing, and the Heater tape as well. So.
And then can we expect another Kings Connected release anytime soon?
Yeah, definitely. So we've got. Without giving too much away, I don't know how soon this will be unleashed, but we've got 2 7s coming out. We've got one ready to roll, and a Kings Connected 7, an A and a B side, original tracks, and then another one which will follow it up in a 3-part series. And their next album is actually underway as well. So those guys are yeah, they're, you know, you want to talk about hunger. Those guys are hungry, you know, not blindly hungry either, like measured, calculated, extremely talented. Yeah, so they're, you know, I'm investing a lot of time into, I invest a lot of time into all the projects, but them as an act, I've invested a lot of time into.
Yeah, no, we look forward to it, man. The last album was arguably the Australian hip hop album of the year.
Word.
I'd have to put it in there.
Yeah,
Not
cool.
to offend anybody that dropped that year, but
Yeah, I think it was. I have no doubts about it, you know. And I think Connected themselves, and that album in particular, is probably as shown to be a little bit of a slow burn to a lot of people. I mean, I had the luxury of working on the album for a couple of years, so I kind of knew by the time it came out how unbelievable it is. And that's kind of one of the things that, one of the other things about Unkut and the sparseness of our drops, but the amount of time that goes into each one. I love the idea of spending a lot of time on an album, because I know by the end of it, if I'm still loving it, then I know that shit is forever. You know, and I think that's one of the things that we can pride ourselves on as a label. I don't think there's been a release, you know, maybe barring the first couple prior to the stage of set, that you know, I know people use the word classic, but people call them like local classics or whatever, and I wear that one proudly, you know what I mean? Because when someone says genuinely that your shit is a classic, you know, that's kind of what you're trying to do again in our lane, you know, for what we do, you know what I mean? And again, that goes back to the world-class shit and not just looking in your own backyard, but looking to put out to not only rap, but put out a product that can hang with you know, your favorite albums, you know.
The lesson. 927. Oh yeah.